In every great story of success, there's a figure who stands in the background, quiet and unwavering, the one who gave everything without ever asking for anything in return. For Stephen Curry, that figure was his mother, Sonya Curry. Long before, the fame, the sold-out arenas, and the glimmer of championship rings, there was a modest home on a tree-lined street in Charlotte, North Carolina. It wasn't big, it wasn't fancy, but it was warm, safe, and filled with a kind of love that couldn't be bought. At the heart of that home was Sonya, resilient, disciplined, and selfless to the core. She woke before dawn, every morning, without fail. While Stephen and his siblings slept, she packed school lunches, replied to emails from the school district, and squeezed in a few quiet moments of prayer. She wasn't just a mother. She was an educator, a mentor, a spiritual guide, and a fierce protector. She ironed uniforms in the dark, memorized basketball schedules alongside school calendars, and somehow always made it to the bleachers with a calm smile, even when her world was spinning. Stephen remembered the nights more than anything. Late nights, when homework turned into frustration, when math problems wouldn't make sense, or when the pressure of basketball became too much. Sonya would sit beside him at the kitchen table, a mug of tea in one hand and her other hand gently resting on his back. She didn't always have the answers, but she made sure he never felt alone. When the money was tight, and it often was, she went without new clothes so her kids could have new shoes. She skipped vacations so they could attend summer camps. She gave up promotions to stay closer to home. The sacrifices were endless, but she never once called them sacrifices. To her, they were simply part of being a mother. As Stephen grew, first into a promising high school player, then into a college standout at Davidson, and finally into one of the most celebrated athletes of his generation, he took a piece of his mother with him everywhere he went. The work ethic, that was hers. The unshakable faith, hers too. The humility in post-game interviews, straight from her example. Years passed. Accolades piled up. Commercials, MVP trophies, NBA titles, millions in endorsements, a life most kids only dreamed about. But even with all the noise and pressure of superstardom, Stephen never lost sight of where it all started, and more importantly, who it started with. During a rare, quiet stretch in his schedule, Stephen sat alone in his home office, flipping through old photo albums. One picture stopped him, a grainy snapshot of his mother sitting in the stands at one of his high school games, bundled up in a worn-out jacket, clapping proudly. Behind her were rows of empty seats. It had been a Tuesday night, freezing cold, and yet she was there. Just as she always was. In that moment, something hit Stephen hard. His mother had lived her entire life in service of others. She had never asked for anything, never treated herself, never truly lived for herself. All those years, she had been pouring from a cup that was never refilled. Stephen leaned back in his chair and whispered to himself, "It's her turn now." That thought became an idea, and that idea became a mission. Within days, he called a trusted real estate agent in Charlotte and asked to see properties that felt peaceful, elegant, and private. Nothing flashy, nothing cold. He wanted warmth, a place that whispered, not shouted, a place where his mother could finally breathe. One property stood out, nestled on the edge of Lake Norman, surrounded by tall Carolina pines, and facing a calm, glassy shoreline sat a modern yet homey lakefront house, floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the living room, flooding the space with sunlight. The kitchen was open, airy, perfect for the kind of Sunday dinners Sonya used to make when everyone could squeeze around one table. The backyard opened into a dock with room for a garden, a hammock, maybe even a few rocking chairs. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't for show. It was hers. Stephen didn't hesitate. He signed the deed that same afternoon. No media, no Instagram story, no press release, just a quiet, intentional act of love. He didn't tell his dad, Dell, didn't even tell his wife, Aisha, until it was done. This wasn't about the family, this was about his mother, about honoring the life she gave up so he could build his own. Stephen imagined the reveal over and over, the shock on her face, the tears in her eyes, the laugh she did when she was overwhelmed. He thought of leaving a note on the kitchen counter that read, "You've always given. Now it's your time to receive." But the story was just beginning, because when Sonya stepped into that house for the first time, what she decided to do with it would go far beyond anything Stephen could have dreamed, and it would touch lives far beyond their family. Mother's Day arrived with Carolina sunshine peeking through the clouds and the scent of fresh magnolias in the air. Stephen had planned every detail, not a lavish event, not a show, but a small, intimate brunch in the garden of his home. Just close family, just love. The table was decorated with Sonya's favorite flowers, white hydrangeas and soft pink peonies, and the menu included her go-to comfort foods, cheddar grits, roasted sweet potatoes, avocado toast with poached eggs. Every detail whispered, "I see you. I know you. This is for you." As they gathered, laughter echoed through the yard. Stephen's kids chased bubbles, while Dell cracked jokes with extended family. But Stephen's heart was pounding. In his shirt pocket was a small black envelope. Inside, a silver key and a handwritten letter. After brunch, when the plates were cleared and the sun had begun to lower behind the trees, Stephen stood up and gently tapped a spoon against his glass. Everyone quieted. "Mom," he said, his voice steady but soft, "can you come here for a second?" Sonya looked up, puzzled but smiled. "What are you up to?" He walked over and handed her the envelope. "This is for you, but open it when you're ready." She looked at him, then at the envelope, then slowly opened it. First the key, then the folded letter, written in Stephen's unmistakably neat, slanted handwriting. "Mom, you've spent your whole life building a home for us. Now it's time. You have one that's just for you, not a place to work, not a place to raise, a place to rest, a place to breathe. I bought you a home by the lake near the trees. Go see it when you're ready. No rush. It's yours, every inch. Thank you for being the reason I could become me. Love always, Stephen." She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The letter trembled in her hands as the first tear slid down her cheek. Her shoulders shook slightly, and then, without a word, she wrapped Stephen in a long, silent hug. No applause, no speech, just 20 seconds of stillness between mother and son. 3 days later, she visited the house. Stephen didn't go with her. He wanted her to take it in on her own terms. The moment Sonya pulled into the gravel driveway and stepped out of her car, she felt something stir deep in her chest. The house was breathtaking, not in a grand Hollywood way, but in its calm presence. The wind rustled through the tall trees. Birds sang over the still water. The stone walkway was lined with lavender, just starting to bloom. She walked inside. Slowly, almost reverently, hardwood floors, natural light, soft earth tones on the walls. In the corner of the kitchen, a book on plant-based cooking, one of her recent interests, left gently on the counter. She smiled. He had thought of everything. Room after room, Sonya could feel years of stress and responsibility melting away. This wasn't just a home, it was a gift of freedom. A chance to choose herself for the first time in decades. And yet, even in that perfect stillness, a strange feeling came over her, a question. What now? That evening, as she sat on the back porch, legs curled beneath her, sipping tea and staring out at the lake, memories began to rise. Not of her own life, but of other women she had known. Single mothers who struggled to make rent. Women she worked with at the school who smiled during the day but cried in the parking lot, friends who never got their turn. She thought of the exhaustion she had buried for so long, and she knew that she wasn't the only one who had carried too much for too long. The idea came like a quiet breeze. What if this home wasn't just for me? Over the next few days, she visited again and again, sometimes to walk through the rooms, sometimes just to sit and think. She didn't move in, not yet. She needed time, space, reflection. Then, 2 weeks later, she called Stephen and said, "Honey, I've made a decision about the house." Stephen, still unsure if she was overwhelmed or unsure about accepting the gift, responded gently, "Whatever you decide, Mom, it's yours." Her voice was calm but clear. "I want to open it up, not just to live in, but to give in. I want to turn it into something healing for women like me, for the ones no one sees." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, Stephen said just 2 words, "Tell me more." What followed would turn a personal gift into a community lifeline, and what Sonya did next would capture national attention. The lake house had been meant as a sanctuary, a quiet place where Sonya Curry could finally rest. But for her, rest had always meant more than silence. It meant purpose, and purpose had always come from serving others. The decision didn't come overnight. It brewed inside her like morning tea, slow, intentional, warming every part of her soul. For days, Sonya journaled. She walked along the shoreline. She prayed in the early morning light. And the more she sat with her thoughts, the clearer her vision became. "This house isn't just a gift," she wrote. "It's a seed, and I think it's meant to grow." She remembered the countless women she had crossed paths with throughout her life, many of them strong, brilliant, kind, and yet worn thin by life's relentless demands. Women who were teachers, nurses, grandmothers raising grandchildren, single, moms juggling 2 jobs, women who had given and forgotten how to receive. And she realized, what if this home could be a place for them, not forever, not for charity, but for healing, for dignity, for restoration. The next morning, she sat down at her laptop and drafted an email to a longtime friend, Rachel Monroe, a licensed therapist who had worked for decades with women in crisis. The subject line was simple: "I have an idea." Within a week, they met at the lake house. Rachel walked from room to room with Sonya, nodding thoughtfully, taking notes on her phone. In the living room, Rachel turned to her and said, "You're serious about this, aren't you?" "Dead serious," Sonya replied. "I want this to become a place where women can come, for a week, maybe 2, and just breathe, rebuild, be reminded of their value." Rachel smiled. "You know this won't be easy." Sonya looked out at the lake, then back at her. "Nothing worth doing ever is." And so, quietly but steadily, the Grace House project was born. It wasn't about turning the home into a shelter. It wasn't clinical. It wasn't temporary housing. It was something different, a restorative retreat for women in transition, teachers on the verge of burnout, mothers leaving abusive relationships, widows rediscovering life, grandmothers who had raised entire generations and forgotten what peace felt like. Stephen listened as she explained the plan in detail a few nights later. She showed him a vision board, soft, earth-toned furniture, shelves of donated books, wellness, workshops, cooking classes led by local chefs, yoga on the deck at sunrise. It was elegant, thoughtful, entirely her. "I didn't buy you this house so you could work again," he said, half joking, half serious. Sonya smiled, resting her hand on his. "I'm not working, Steph. I'm living." He stared at her for a long second, then simply nodded. "Okay, let's build it." Within 3 months, the house was transformed, not structurally, but spiritually. Sonya partnered with local therapists and churches. She reached out to women's groups, community centers, and non-profits across Charlotte and beyond, Word spread quickly, not because of her name, but because of the vision. No press, no fanfare, just women helping women. They welcomed their first guest that fall, a 41-year-old mother of 3 who had just left a toxic relationship. She was exhausted, angry, afraid. Sonya greeted her personally at the door with tea and a blanket. No questions, no judgment, just warmth. By the end of the second week, the woman had started painting again, something she hadn't done since college. On her last day, she wrote a note and left it on the nightstand. "This house gave me more than rest. It gave me permission to matter again." That note became the first page in a small leather journal Sonya kept by the window. By winter, the journal was full of stories, some heartbreaking, some hopeful, all sacred. Women came and went week after week. They planted flowers in the backyard. They sat in circles and cried. They danced in the kitchen to old soul music. They laughed again. Stephen would visit from time to time, always quietly. He never posted about it, never spoke about it on camera. But every time he walked through the doors, he felt something bigger than basketball. And eventually, the story got out, not through headlines, but through whispers, word of mouth, one woman telling another, "There's a place, it's quiet and it's safe, and it's run by someone who understands." Soon, the Grace House project was no longer just one house. It was a movement. It had been nearly a year since Sonya first opened the doors of the lake house to a woman in need. In that time, the Grace House project had grown quietly but powerfully, like roots spreading underground. There were now 3 houses, one just outside of Raleigh, another tucked into a quiet stretch of Asheville, all decorated with the same care and warmth as the original, natural light, calming colors, soft blankets on every bed. Sonya didn't want these homes to feel like facilities. She wanted them to feel like a hug. What started as a single act of love from son to mother had become a sanctuary for dozens of women who had never known rest. But for Stephen, the impact went deeper than he expected. He was still playing, still traveling, still training. But every time he walked into a packed arena or sat under the bright lights of a post-game interview, something in him had shifted. Fame was familiar, but this was different. This wasn't about being remembered for a shot or a season. This was about what he would leave after the final buzzer. One evening, after a long road trip, Stephen returned home to Charlotte. He stopped by the original Grace House, unannounced. Sonya wasn't there. She was speaking at a women's leadership event in Atlanta, but the porch light was on. A soft glow spilled out from the living room window. Inside, he found one of the residents, a young woman named Eleanor, seated by the fireplace with a journal in her lap. She looked up, startled, then smiled. "You're him," she said gently. "You're her son," Stephen nodded. "I'm Stephen. It's nice to meet you." She closed the journal and set it aside. "I just got here 2 days ago. I haven't slept through the night in months, but last night I did. This place is different." He didn't press her. He didn't ask for her story. He simply sat across from her and listened. After a long pause, she said, "Thank you for this." Stephen replied, "You don't need to thank me. My mom built this. I just gave her the keys." Elena smiled. "Well, she changed my life, and I guess you did too, in your own way." That night, Stephen sat alone on the back porch, looking out over the water, the same spot where Sonya had once made the decision to do something greater than simply accept a gift. He thought about everything that had happened since then, and, for the first time in a long time, he cried, quietly, gratefully. He realized that this, not the rings, not the endorsements, not even the records, was the most meaningful thing he had ever been part of. A few weeks later, ESPN ran a small feature, not about Stephen's stats, but about the Grace House project. They highlighted Sonya's vision, the women she had helped, and how a quiet gift turned into a national movement. The segment ended with a simple quote from Sonya. "A house is just walls and windows. But healing? That's what makes it a home. And sometimes healing starts when someone finally says, "You deserve this just because you're you." The video went viral, not because of shock value, not because of drama, but because people were hungry for hope, for purpose, for proof. That kindness could still echo louder than chaos. And Stephen, he kept playing, he kept showing up. But now, at every post-game interview, every charity gala, every speaking event, when someone asked him what he was most proud of, he no longer talked about championships. He simply said, "I gave my mom a house, and she turned it into a movement."